All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting to the daily vlog. This is daily vlog number, I think it's 45, somewhere around there. Sounds about right. Or 55. Sorry, not 45, 55. Their numbers are involved, folks. So today, I want to talk about something that I think people aren't really blowing out of proportion, but just don't understand how places outside the U.S. work. And it's related to Dungeons and Dragons. Recently, Wizards of the Coast, through I think D&D Beyond, made the announcement that they are no longer going to be publishing their books in Portuguese. For anyone that doesn't know, in addition, Wizards of the Coast is a US-based company. Dungeons & Dragons is an English-based RPG, meaning all of the books are written in English first, but they're translated to a bunch of different languages. I want to open up the page here to see if they actually... Yeah, so the language that currently they produce books in are English, French, German, Italian, Japanese, Spanish, and right now they currently publish things in Portuguese as well. And they made a post on D&D Beyond saying that they were no longer going to be publishing Portuguese language books. And this has started getting some people getting mad about the greed of Hasbro and all this stuff. And I wanted to kind of set the record straight, because I actually had a buddy of mine that actually posted about how sad this was for Brazilians in particular, because the primary language of Brazil is Portuguese, as is a large portion of South America. Portuguese is, I believe, the most spoken language in South America, with Spanish coming in at a close second. Spanish and Portuguese, the two main languages that are spoken all throughout South America. And so he mentioned, and a lot of people going, damn, I guess you just don't want people in Brazil playing your game. And the fact of the matter is, the idea that a population only speaks the primary language of the country that they live in is a very American problem. The vast majority of the world is bilingual minimum. There are quite a few places where it's extremely common to speak a minimum of 2 to 3 languages. And if you're in a country where there's kind of a melting pot of a lot of different languages, you may know smatterings of 5, 6, or 7 different languages. So the idea that no longer publishing D&D books in Portuguese is somehow going to mean that people in that market can't play just isn't right. Most people in Brazil, in addition to speaking Portuguese, probably speak either English or Spanish or both, in addition to Portuguese, because that's just how it is. Again, the idea of speaking only a single language is almost an exclusively American problem. If we go north to Canada, most of Canada can speak a little bit of French, because in Quebec, students are required to learn both French and English, and all businesses in Quebec are required to have French signage. So most of Canada is either bilingual at least, or understands enough French to be able to get by with the things like that. It's one of the reasons why Tim Hortons is spelled... Tim Hortons is a kind of like Dunkin' Donuts style thing in Canada. And Tim Hortons is spelled Tim and then Hortons Hortons. And it's not because there are multiple Hortons. It's because the apostrophe S that we use in English to make something possessive doesn't exist in French. And so, in order for Tim Hortons to operate in Quebec, they cannot use an exclusively English grammatical structure. And so they had to take the apostrophe S out because of these strict French language laws in Quebec. Um, most of Europe is bilingual. I believe actually French is actually the second most common language spoken throughout Europe, aside from English. And I believe England, there's a lot of monolingual people. But as soon as you get to Ireland, and especially not just Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK, but actually Ireland, the Irish language is still spoken by quite a few different people. When you get to Scotland, the further north you get and the further outside of big cities, there's still people that speak Scottish Gaelic there. And again, in Italy, most people speak Italian and English, and possibly French. In France, everybody speaks French. Generally, also understand at least a little bit of English. They might also speak a little bit of Spanish or Italian. We are one of the few countries in the world, and by we I mean U.S. We are one of the few countries in the world where we don't make a concentrated effort to teach our children multiple languages. So the idea that somehow no longer publishing things in Portuguese is going to... It's not. People in Brazil, not only are they not going to stop buying D&D books simply because they're not printed in Portuguese, there's a very good chance that they are selling more English language books in Brazil and other majority Portuguese-speaking countries than they have ever sold of books in Portuguese, because a lot of people will play the game in the original language, because changing languages, especially with how, and I've talked about this before, you have to be very careful with the wording that you use when you are creating a tabletop RPG or really any kind of rules set, because different words have different meanings and they can mean different things, and translating into another language can create conflict and create rules issues that don't exist in English. So there are a lot of people in Brazil and other majority Portuguese-speaking countries that still buy English language books because, first of all, they can read and write English, as can a large portion of the world. I believe English is still the most spoken language in the world when you combine both primary and secondary speakers, followed very closely behind by, I believe it's Mandarin Chinese. And the real reason why Mandarin Chinese comes in so high is because China has a massive population. When you actually look at the number of countries that speak Mandarin Chinese as a secondary language, it's significantly lower than the number of countries that speak English as a secondary language. English is a trade language, and has been for easily 50 or 60 years, probably going back at least 100 years, if not further 200-300, back when the British Empire was really, really big. English has been a trade language for a very long time, and so people learn it if for no other reason than to be able to conduct international trade. It's a very, very common language to do trade in. So yeah, I find it really, really weird that people think that this is somehow motivated by greed, or it's not. People that speak Portuguese are not buying Portuguese language books. They're buying them in English. And that's why they're no longer going to be translating it into Portuguese. And again, Portuguese is what's called a Romance language. And basically all that means is Romance languages are languages that their roots, the root language that they all kind of evolved from is Latin. So they're all Latin-based language. French, Italian, Spanish, and Portuguese are all Romance languages. And I took French in high school and college for about 6 years. At one point, I was partially fluent in it. I can no longer speak for French fluently, but I can read it pretty well. I can tell you right now, written down, all the Romance languages are incredibly similar. There's a few words that don't translate between the various languages, but if you know one Romance language, the rest of them are significantly easier to pick up. And a lot of times it's minor a lot of times it's pronunciation issues. because different languages will do different things. Like in Spanish, you pronounce every single letter. Some of the letters have weird pronunciations, like double L's in Spanish are pronounced as a Y. That we would pronounce them in English. It has a y sound instead of l. But other than that, Spanish, you pronounce every single letter. In French, you take all the letters in the world in the word, you throw them in a bag, and then you just randomly pull out letters that you decide to pronounce on this particular day. Speaking French is such a monumentally weird language. But that's really the biggest difference. There's a few words that change between translations, like welcome in French is bienvenue. And in Italian, welcome is bienvenido. But they use the same root word of bien. They're just pronounced very, very differently, and they use a slightly different conjugation because they're conjugating differently. So if someone quite literally is exclusively only speaks Portuguese, which would be very, very strange, they can still get an Italian or a Spanish translation and be able to get most of what it is. Now, with a tabletop RPG, that does create a few issues, simply because, again, every word matters. But the last 3 books that they're going to be publishing are going to be Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, Journey Through the Radiant Citadel, and Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen, which all 3 of those books were published last year. So translating takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. But those books, a lot of them are not new rule supplements. They're new adventures. So again, they're really not going to have that big of an issue getting them. And again, I mentioned this before when I made that video talking about recap videos and why Call of Cthulhu is so big in Japan. And I mentioned one of the reasons it's so big is that the publishers of Call of Cthulhu have made a concentrated effort to get Japanese translations as quickly as possible because they're so popular in Japan. However, a large portion of the Call of Cthulhu audience plays Call of Cthulhu using English books. Like, this is an extremely common thing to use the original language that the game was written in. Again, it's only in the US and parts of the UK where we find something completely impossible to digest if it's not translated into our primary language. Literally everywhere else in the world just goes, oh, this is in another language. I guess either I need to learn this language or find a way to translate it myself. So, yeah, I find it really, really bizarre that everyone's freaking out about this and claiming that it's this huge good. It's not. Nobody was buying Portuguese language books anywhere. And they were selling more English language books. I will guarantee this. They were selling more English language books in countries like Brazil that are majority Portuguese speaking, or in Portugal. They were selling more English language books than they were Portuguese. And at that point, there's really no reason to publish the Portuguese language books. It's just a waste of their time that they could use on a million other things. Again, translation in general is not an easy job. And then when you're going from just regular translation where you're just trying to get the basic themes across to translating rules where if you use the wrong word, you can massively change how that rule is read and therefore how people play the game. That takes a shit ton of time. Again, Fizban's Treasury of Dragons. I want to see if I can. I'm going to look up. Originally published October 26th of 2021. It is an almost 3-year-old book, and they're still going through the process of translating it into Portuguese because they have already had to translate it into Spanish, Italian, French, German, Japanese. What was the other one that they did? What were they? So yeah, English, French, German, Italian, Japanese, and Spanish. So they're already translating books that are written into English into 5 other languages. they just decided not to do it for a sixth language. Now, for me personally, again, I spoke French at one point. I can read most Spanish. I can read most Italian. Portuguese to me has always sounded like gibberish. Like I can identify Italian, I can identify Spanish, I can identify French. I don't know what it is about Portuguese, but to me, Portuguese sounds like gibberish compared to any other romantic language. I don't know if I can read Portuguese. I haven't been exposed to written Portuguese enough that I think I could fuss it out. But so part of me wonders if just Portuguese is just more difficult to translate because again, translating French, Italian, and Spanish, the languages are really, really similar, and they borrow a lot of words from each other. So to me, it seemed kind of weird that they were stopping Portuguese. But again, most of the world speaks a second language. A lot of those second languages are English. And if it's not English, if you already speak one romantic language, you probably speak another. It's unbelievably common. So, yeah, it was something that was just rubbing me the wrong way. All these people, like, again, I understand that people just want to get mad at Wizards of the Coast because it's popular. But this is a dumb thing to get upset about. No, they are not losing any market whatsoever. There are not people in Brazil that are just going, well, I guess I can never play Dungeons and Dragons again because they won't print it in one of the languages that I speak. No, again, there are people that are buying more English language D&D books in Brazil than are buying Portuguese language ones. It just wasn't selling, and it wasn't worth the effort since people can already play the game without going through the effort. And I know some people that prefer using the original language that it was written in as opposed to using it to translation, because again, the translation can always get things wrong, and you basically have to rely that the translators not only understand your language well enough to be able to translate to it, and the original language it was written in well enough to be able to make accurate translations, but they also have to understand game design well enough to know when to use certain words. Because again, just translating them is not enough for a tabletop RPG. You also have to have an understanding of the underlying rules and knowing that if I translate this word in this particular way, it's going to be interpreted like this, and that will massively change how the game plays. So I know there are a lot of people that simply won't use official translations. They will learn the language themselves so they know how it's actually supposed to be played. Again, Call of Cthulhu in Japan makes a concentrated effort to get Japanese translations to them, and there's still a massive portion of the Cthulhu population in Japan that are playing it in English. It's how it works. So anyway, I thought it was interesting that people are getting bent out of shape over something this stupid. Get mad about stuff that really matters. Don't get mad that they're just not making a translation that no one is buying. Anyway, that's all for me today. See you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.